light leans in, whispers low. A shadow dance, a candle's glow. Smoke curls up like secrets shared. A fragile bond, a heart laid bare. Moonlight and cigarettes, a memory that lingers yet. A stolen glance, a soft regret. Moonlight and cigarettes.
There exists a peculiar form of homelessness that has nothing to do with having a roof over your head. It's the homelessness of never finding your place among people, of walking into rooms and feeling the subtle but unmistakable shift in energy that says you don't quite fit the established equation. It's the exhausting experience of being perpetually almost there, eternally on the verge of belonging, but never quite arriving at that magical moment of true acceptance and understanding. This isn't about shyness or social anxiety, though those might be symptoms. This isn't about lacking social skills, though you might have convinced yourself that's the problem. This is about carrying within yourself a frequency that doesn't match the dominant channels that most people tune into. It's about possessing a kind of intensity, sensitivity, or depth that makes others comfortable in small doses, but overwhelming in larger ones. If you've ever felt like you're speaking a language that everyone almost understands, but not quite. If you've ever wondered why conversations seem to pause when you enter them. If you've ever felt like you're performing a careful translation of yourself just to be tolerated in social spaces, then you know the particular ache I'm describing. It's the ache of being fundamentally misunderstood, not because you're mysterious or complex, but because your natural way of being requires more bandwidth than most social situations are designed to accommodate. The question that haunts people who experience this chronic displacement is not just why don't I fit in, but something deeper and more existential. How do you build a meaningful life when you can't find your people? How do you create purpose and connection when the traditional pathways to belonging seem to require you to edit out the very qualities that make you who you are? How do you live authentically when authenticity itself seems to be what keeps you on the outside? What I want to explore with you today is not how to fix this condition or overcome it, but how to understand it differently. Because what if the problem isn't that you're broken or inadequate? What if the experience of not belonging anywhere is actually pointing towards something important about both you and the nature of belonging itself? What if your exile carries within it its own strange gifts and possibilities that can only be discovered by those who learn to inhabit the margins skillfully? The first thing to understand about chronic non-belonging is that it often stems from what we might call differential sensitivity. Some people are born with nervous systems that are more finely tuned, more responsive to subtleties in their environment that others simply don't register. This isn't a disorder or a weakness. It's a different way of processing reality that comes with both challenges and capabilities that are invisible to those who operate on more standard frequencies. When you possess this heightened sensitivity, you notice things that others seem content to overlook. You pick up on the undercurrents in group conversations, the unspoken tensions, the casual cruelties that get dismissed as harmless jokes. You feel the emotional temperature of rooms in ways that others don't seem to register. You carry an internal barometer that's constantly measuring atmospheric pressure that others don't even know exists. This creates a particular form of social vertigo. You're never quite sure where you stand because you're picking up signals that others aren't receiving. You might feel danger where others feel safety, depth where others see surface, significance where others find banality. The result is that you often seem to be reacting to a different reality than the one everyone else is inhabiting, which makes you appear either overly sensitive or strangely intense. The exhaustion that comes from this differential sensitivity isn't just about being tired from social interaction. It's the exhaustion that comes from being a constant translator between the world as you experience it and the world as others seem to experience it. You learn to modulate your responses, to edit your observations, to perform a version of yourself that's more manageable for others to be around. This performance is so automatic that you might not even realize you're doing it, but it's constantly draining your energy reserves. Over time, many people with this experience develop what could be called the belonging amnesia. They forget what it feels like to exist without constantly monitoring their impact on others. They lose touch with their natural responses because they've spent so much energy crafting appropriate responses. They become estranged from their own authentic reactions because those reactions have been consistently met with discomfort or rejection from others. This amnesia is particularly painful because it means you're not only disconnected from others, but also disconnected from yourself. You might find yourself in the strange position of not knowing what you actually think or feel about things because you've become so skilled at figuring out what others want you to think or feel. The very adaptation that was meant to help you belong better actually creates a deeper form of alienation from your own inner experience. We live in a culture that's obsessed with the idea of finding your tribe. Social media is filled with inspirational quotes about how your people are out there waiting for you, about how you just need to keep looking until you find the group that will celebrate your uniqueness rather than merely tolerate it. These messages, while well-intentioned, can actually create more pain for people who have spent years or decades searching without success. The mythology of tribe finding suggests that belonging is simply a matter of correct placement, like finding the right puzzle piece to complete a predetermined picture. It implies that somewhere out there exists a group of people who will not only accept your intensity, sensitivity, or strangeness, but actively appreciate it. All you need to do is keep trying different communities. Keep refining your search parameters. Keep believing that the right combination of people and circumstances will eventually unlock the belonging you've been seeking. But what happens when you've tried the activist communities and found they wanted your passion but not your nuanced thinking? When you've explored intellectual circles that appreciated your curiosity but were uncomfortable with your emotional depth? When you've sampled spiritual communities that welcomed your seeking but were threatened by your questioning? When you've engaged with creative groups that valued your originality but were put off by your refusal to perform casual cynicism? The painful truth that many people discover is that most communities, even those that pride themselves on accepting diversity, have implicit requirements for membership. They need you to be intense in acceptable ways, sensitive about approved topics, strange within manageable parameters. They want the interesting parts of your uniqueness without the inconvenient parts of your full humanity. This creates a cycle of incremental self-betrayal that can be devastating to recognize. Each group you attempt to join requires you to highlight certain aspects of yourself while dimming others. You learn to perform sophisticated calculations about how much authenticity you can reveal while still maintaining access to community. The result is often a kind of psychological split, where you become alienated not only from others, but from the parts of yourself that you've learned to hide. The underground river metaphor captures something essential about people who struggle with chronic non-belonging. There runs through certain individuals an intensity that cannot be diverted or contained without causing significant damage to their psychological ecosystem. This intensity manifests differently in different people. For some, it's emotional intensity that experiences feelings at volumes that seem to overwhelm others. For others, it's intellectual intensity that needs to examine ideas with thoroughness that exceeds social comfort levels. Still others carry creative intensity that sees possibilities and connections that demand expression, even when no one has requested them. This intensity is not pathology, though it's often treated as such. It's not evidence of poor emotional regulation, though it's frequently framed that way. It's a fundamental aspect of how certain nervous systems are configured, how certain consciousnesses interface with reality. The problem arises when this natural intensity encounters social environments designed for moderate temperatures and steady states. The person carrying this underground river learns early to become fluent in apologizing for their existence. Sorry for caring too much about issues that others find boring. Sorry for asking questions that make people uncomfortable. Sorry for having reactions that seem disproportionate. Sorry for needing more depth in conversations than casual interaction allows. Sorry for being too much, always too much, never quite the right amount. But what if this intensity is not something to apologize for, but something to honor and channel skillfully? What if it represents not a failure to adapt properly, but a refusal to sacrifice essential aspects of consciousness for the sake of easy social integration? The challenge becomes not how to make the river smaller, but how to create conditions where it can flow without destroying everything in its path, including the person through whom it flows. This requires a fundamental shift from seeing intensity as a problem to be managed to recognizing it as a resource to be stewarded. It means accepting that you will never be the person who can skim lightly across the surface of experience, never the one who can compartmentalize easily, never the one who can turn off the part of yourself that notices what others prefer to ignore. Instead of viewing this as limitation, what if it's actually a form of specialization? In the natural world, ecosystems depend on diversity. Different species occupy different niches, perform different functions, contribute different capabilities to the overall health of the system. The same principle applies to human communities, though we often lose sight of this truth in our rush toward conformity and social comfort. The person who can't fit into conventional categories might be serving functions that are essential but undervalued. Perhaps you're the one who notices what others miss, who asks questions that need to be asked, who feels things that need to be felt, who sees possibilities that need to be explored. Perhaps your inability to be satisfied with surface explanations serves a vital function in preventing communities from becoming complacent or self-deceiving. Perhaps your sensitivity to emotional undercurrents helps groups navigate dynamics they would otherwise ignore until they become destructive. This doesn't mean you should martyr yourself to serve communities that can't appreciate your contributions. But it does suggest that your differences might be features rather than bugs, adaptations rather than malfunctions, gifts rather than curses. The challenge lies in finding ways to honor and express these gifts without requiring others to validate or understand them in order for you to feel worthwhile. One of the most profound shifts that can happen for people who struggle with belonging is discovering what might be called the ecology of outsiders. This is not a formal community or organization, but rather a loose network of individuals who recognize something essential in each other across the distances of their respective alienations. These connections often happen briefly, sometimes lasting only for the duration of a single conversation, but they carry a quality of recognition that can be sustaining for months. Meeting someone who inhabits this ecology is like encountering someone who speaks your native language after years of communicating through inadequate translations. There's an immediate understanding of the particular exhaustion that comes from constant social translation, the relief of being seen without having to perform palatability, the recognition that your way of being in the world is not aberrant but represents one valid approach to organizing consciousness. These connections don't follow traditional community models. They might never develop into lasting friendships, might never create ongoing support systems, might never form the kind of stable networks that others take for granted. Instead, they operate more like underground root systems that connect distant trees, allowing resources and recognition to flow between isolated organisms that would otherwise exist in complete separation. This network teaches its participants a different understanding of belonging. Instead of the conventional model of finding your fixed place in a stable community, it offers the possibility of temporary but profound connections that arise and dissolve according to their own organic timing. Instead of the security of permanent membership, it provides the recognition that you are part of something larger even when you feel completely alone. The practice of self-belonging becomes essential when external belonging proves either elusive or too costly in terms of self-compromise. This is not the same as self-acceptance, which can sometimes feel passive or resigned. Self-belonging is more active and intentional. It's the practice of creating internal conditions where all parts of yourself are welcome, where your intensity is celebrated rather than merely tolerated, where your differences are treated as features rather than problems to be solved. Self-belonging begins with a revolutionary act of taking your own side. This sounds simple, but proves remarkably difficult for people who have spent years learning to view themselves through the lens of social acceptability. Taking your own side means defending your right to feel what you feel, even when others find it excessive. It means honoring your need for depth even when others prefer surface interactions. It means respecting your questions even when they make others uncomfortable. This practice requires developing an internal witness that can observe self-criticism with curiosity, rather than automatically accepting it as truth. Notice how quickly you move to invalidate your own experience when it doesn't match others' expectations. Notice how often you gaslight yourself about the legitimacy of your reactions. Notice the internal voice that constantly suggests you should be different, smaller, easier to accommodate. Self-belonging also involves creating practices and rituals that nourish the parts of yourself that others find challenging. If your intensity needs expression, create outlets for it through writing, art, movement, or whatever forms allow it to flow without requiring external validation. If your sensitivity needs protection, develop practices that help you maintain boundaries without shutting down completely. If your curiosity needs feeding, pursue it even when others don't share your enthusiasm. The goal is not to become entirely self-sufficient in a way that doesn't need others, but to develop enough internal stability that you can engage with others from choice rather than desperate need. When you belong to yourself first, interactions with others become opportunities for connection rather than auditions for acceptance. You can show up authentically rather than performing versions of yourself designed to please others. One of the most transformative discoveries for people who live as permanent outsiders is realizing that alienation itself can become a creative medium. The very experiences that initially felt like evidence of fundamental wrongness can be transformed into sources of insight, beauty, and meaning that would be impossible to access from positions of conventional belonging. The outsider perspective provides access to observations that insiders cannot make because position determines what becomes visible. From the margins, you notice patterns that are invisible to those embedded within systems. You recognize contradictions that those invested in maintaining existing structures cannot afford to acknowledge. You perceive possibilities that those committed to current arrangements cannot imagine. This perspective often comes with the burden of seeing what others prefer not to see, of carrying awareness that feels isolating rather than liberating. But it also provides access to forms of truth-telling that can only emerge from positions of non-belonging. The person who has nothing to lose by disrupting comfortable illusions is often the only one free to name what everyone already knows, but cannot afford to speak. Transforming alienation into creative expression requires learning to trust your perspective even when it diverges from collective consensus. It means valuing what you observe from the margins, rather than dismissing it as the distorted view of someone who doesn't properly belong. It means recognizing that your outsider status grants you anthropological insight into cultures you observe without fully inhabiting. The art that emerges from this transformation often carries a quality of recognition that speaks to others who share similar experiences of displacement. It creates temporary communities of understanding that form around shared recognition rather than shared identity. The outsider who learns to transform their alienation into expression becomes a translator, making visible experiences that others have felt but couldn't articulate. Living as someone who doesn't naturally belong anywhere is not just a personal challenge, but a political position, whether conscious or not. In a culture that demands conformity as the price of inclusion, refusing to shrink yourself to fit available categories becomes an act of resistance. Every time you choose authenticity over acceptability, you challenge systems that profit from human malleability. The pressure to conform serves specific functions in maintaining existing power structures. Systems of control rely on people being willing to sacrifice essential aspects of themselves for promises of belonging. When you refuse this trade, when you insist on existing as you are rather than as others need you to be, you demonstrate that alternative ways of being human remain possible. This is why authentic non-belonging often feels threatening to others in ways that can be difficult to understand. It's not just that you're different, but that your difference implies the possibility of choosing differently. Your refusal to edit yourself suggests that others' editing of themselves might not be as necessary as they've convinced themselves it is. Your willingness to exist outside approved categories raises questions about who determines those categories and whose interests they serve. The person who learns to survive and thrive without conventional belonging becomes living proof that certain promises might not be as essential as advertised. If you can find meaning, connection, and purpose while remaining authentically yourself, what does that suggest about all the compromises others have made in the name of fitting in? This political dimension doesn't require explicit activism, though it often leads in that direction. Simply existing authentically in a culture that demands conformity is itself a form of revolutionary act. Living visibly as someone who cannot be easily categorized or controlled creates possibilities for others who might be considering similar choices. The challenge lies in inhabiting this position without becoming hardened by it. The goal is not to reject all forms of community or cooperation, but to engage with others on terms that don't require fundamental self-betrayal. It's about finding ways to contribute to collective endeavors while maintaining your essential nature. To care about others while refusing to sacrifice yourself for their comfort. There exists something fundamentally spiritual about the experience of never quite belonging anywhere, though this spirituality might not be recognized by conventional religious frameworks. It's the spirituality of the seeker who cannot accept easy answers, of the questioner who cannot stop questioning, of the one who carries within themselves an irrepressible longing for something that exceeds the boundaries of available categories. This spiritual dimension recognizes that your inability to settle into conventional belonging might be pointing toward deeper truths about the nature of human existence. Perhaps we are all, at our core, too vast and complex to be fully contained within any single community or identity. Perhaps the experience of not belonging anywhere is actually closer to the truth of what it means to be human than the illusion of perfect fit. Many mystical traditions speak of a fundamental homelessness that characterizes human consciousness, a sense that we are spiritual beings temporarily inhabiting physical forms, never quite at home in any purely material arrangement. The person who cannot find their place in conventional social structures might be experiencing this spiritual homelessness more consciously than those who successfully lose themselves in the comforts of belonging. This perspective doesn't diminish the very real pain of social alienation, or suggest that loneliness is somehow spiritually superior to connection. Rather, it offers a framework for understanding that pain is potentially pointing towards something beyond itself. The ache of not belonging might be evidence not of personal failure, but of spiritual accuracy. A refusal to accept partial solutions to fundamental questions of existence. Learning to inhabit this spiritual dimension requires developing comfort with questions that don't have answers, with longings that cannot be satisfied through conventional means. It means accepting that part of your role might be to carry awareness that others cannot or will not carry, to serve as a kind of canary in the coal mine, sensitive to toxins that others have learned to breathe without noticing. This spiritual exile often comes with its own forms of guidance and support, though these might not be recognized as such by those seeking more conventional community. Synchronicities multiply. Books appear at exactly the moment you need them. Strangers offer precisely the words you need to hear. Nature provides comfort and insight in ways that feel almost personal. The universe seems to conspire to support your journey even when human community feels elusive. One of the most surprising discoveries in learning to live as a permanent outsider is that the very qualities that make you difficult to accommodate in groups often create possibilities for extraordinarily deep one-on-one connections. The intensity that overwhelms in group settings can become the foundation for profound intimacy with individuals who are equipped to meet it. The sensitivity that makes you high maintenance in casual contexts can enable you to perceive and respond to nuances that others miss entirely. These connections don't happen frequently, but when they do, they carry a quality of recognition and understanding that can be life-sustaining. They arise not despite your difficulty fitting in elsewhere, but because of it. The characteristics that make you an outsider in most contexts become the basis for intimacy that is rare and precious. Precisely because it requires someone willing to engage at depths that most people prefer to avoid. The person who has learned to survive as an outsider often develops unusual capacity for seeing and accepting others in their full complexity. Having spent time being misunderstood, you become skilled at looking beneath surface presentations to deeper currents that actually drive behavior. Having experienced the loneliness of being reduced to your most challenging characteristics, you develop ability to hold space for others' contradictions and complications. This creates conditions for connections that go beyond usual social exchanges of performance and approval. Instead of relating to edited versions of each other, you can meet as whole humans complete with respective intensities, sensitivities, and peculiarities. These relationships don't require you to manage your impact or moderate your expression. They create space for you to exist at your natural volume and frequency. The paradox is that your very difficulty with broad-based belonging can make you exceptionally skilled at deep individual connection. Your outsider status teaches you to value authenticity over acceptability, depth over breadth, truth over comfort. These same values, when shared with another person, create foundations for relationships that can withstand and even thrive on levels of honesty that would destabilize more conventional connections. When conventional paths to belonging and contribution prove inadequate, people who don't fit standard categories often develop what might be called an underground economy of meaning. This operates outside traditional structures of work, community, and recognition, but provides essential forms of nourishment and purpose that cannot be found through conventional channels. In this underground economy, value is measured not by external metrics of success or social approval, but by quality of meaning generated through authentic expression and genuine connection. A late-night conversation that helps someone feel less alone might be worth more than a promotion at a job that requires you to check essential parts of yourself at the door. A piece of art that speaks to one person's deepest experience might be more valuable than work that receives widespread but shallow appreciation. This economy operates through gift exchange rather than market transaction. The currency is recognition, understanding, inspiration, and the particular form of love that exists between people who see and accept each other's impossible aspects. You offer what you've discovered through your own navigation of the margins. Others offer what they've learned through theirs. Participation in this underground economy requires learning to recognize value that others might overlook or dismiss. It means trusting that your particular way of seeing and being has worth even when it cannot be easily monetized or socially validated. It means developing forms of creativity and contribution that arise from your authentic nature rather than attempts to please existing markets or communities. The challenge lies in participating in this alternative economy while still navigating practical requirements of the conventional world. This requires developing what might be called bilingual competence, the ability to function in conventional contexts when necessary while maintaining access to underground networks that provide actual nourishment. There exists a particular quality of loneliness that accompanies never quite belonging anywhere, and this loneliness carries within it its own curriculum. It teaches things that cannot be learned through social comfort or easy integration. It develops capacities that emerge only through sustained encounter with existential solitude. This loneliness teaches self-reliance in the deepest sense, not brittle independence that comes from refusing help, but inner stability that comes from learning to find resources within yourself that external circumstances cannot destroy. It teaches you to become your own good company, to develop internal conversations that are sustaining rather than self-destructive, to create meaning that doesn't depend on external validation. It also teaches discernment about the quality of connection. When you've spent significant time in solitude, you become sensitive to differences between genuine meeting and social performance. You learn to distinguish between people who are interested in knowing you and people who want to use you to feel better about themselves. This loneliness teaches compassion in unexpected ways. Understanding the depth of your own longing for connection makes you more sensitive to others' hidden struggles with belonging. Your own experience of alienation becomes a bridge to understanding rather than a wall of resentment. Perhaps most importantly, this loneliness teaches that survival is possible even under conditions that initially seem unbearable. Each time you navigate through periods of acute alienation, you add to evidence that you can handle whatever comes. Each time you find meaning and beauty despite feeling fundamentally alone, you expand your capacity to create significance independently of external circumstances. The loneliness that comes with not belonging anywhere is not something to be cured, but something to be inhabited skillfully. It becomes a teacher that reveals resources you didn't know you possessed, depths you hadn't yet explored, capacities you hadn't needed to develop. It transforms from evidence of fundamental inadequacy to proof of fundamental resilience. Living as someone who doesn't belong anywhere eventually leads to fundamental questions about the nature of belonging itself. Is the longing for belonging a basic human need that must be satisfied? Or is it a developmental stage that can eventually be transcended? Is the goal to find better ways of fitting in, or to discover what lies beyond the need to fit in at all? There comes a point where the very concept of belonging begins to seem less like a solution and more like another limitation. If belonging requires finding your tribe, what happens when you realize you don't want to be restricted to any single tribe? If fitting in means accepting boundaries of available categories, what about parts of you that exceed all categories? This is not about rejecting connection or community, but about questioning whether traditional models of belonging are adequate for the full range of human possibility. Perhaps the experience of not belonging anywhere is actually pointing toward more mature forms of relating that don't require security of permanent membership or fixed identity. In some spiritual traditions, the ultimate goal is described as universal belonging that transcends particular attachments. The sage belongs everywhere and nowhere, equally at home in all contexts because their identity doesn't depend on external validation or group membership. They can participate fully in whatever situation arises while maintaining inner freedom from the need to be accepted or understood. This transcendent possibility doesn't come from rejecting human connection, but from engaging with it from places of inner completeness rather than desperate need. It means being able to offer your gifts freely, without attachment to how they're received, to love without possessiveness, to participate without losing yourself in group identity. For the person who has never found their tribe, this transcendent possibility might actually be more accessible than it is for those who have found security and belonging. Having never experienced the comfort of perfect fit, you might be more prepared to discover what lies beyond the need for such fit. Having learned to find meaning without external validation, you might be better equipped to engage with others from generous overflow rather than seeking fulfillment. The question of how to live when you belong nowhere ultimately transforms into how to live so fully and authentically that belonging becomes irrelevant. Not because you don't care about connection, but because your sense of worth and meaning no longer depends on others' approval or understanding. You learn to inhabit your own life so completely that external validation becomes nice when it happens, but unnecessary for your basic well-being. This transformation doesn't eliminate the capacity for deep connection, but changes its quality. Instead of relating from mutual need, you can relate from mutual abundance. Instead of seeking completion through others, you can offer your completeness as a gift. Instead of requiring others to understand you in order to love them, you can love them as they are while remaining true to yourself. Perhaps the painful experience of never belonging anywhere is actually preparation for a way of being that transcends the limitations of conventional belonging while maintaining access to its gifts. This is not a consolation prize, but a different kind of achievement entirely. The achievement of learning to be fully human without requiring others to accommodate your humanity. The art of existing authentically in a world that often demands performance. The skill of finding meaning and purpose that arise from within rather than being granted from without. In the end, the question is not whether you will ever find your place among others, but whether you can learn to create a place within yourself that is so rich, so genuine, so alive, that it becomes a gift to whatever situations and relationships you encounter. When you master the art of belonging to yourself, you discover that you can bring that belonging energy into any context, transforming not only your own experience, but potentially the experiences of others who encounter your authentic presence. The journey from nowhere to everywhere begins with the courage to be exactly who you are, even when no one else seems to understand or appreciate it. It continues with the patience to build a life that honors your nature, rather than apologizing for it. And it culminates in the recognition that your very inability to fit into predetermined categories might be pointing toward forms of human possibility that the world desperately needs, but rarely makes space for. You are not broken because you don't belong anywhere. You are not inadequate because others find you too much. You are not failed because you cannot perform the social calculations that others seem to master effortlessly. You are simply operating on a frequency that requires more courage to inhabit, but potentially offers more depth to explore. The question is not how to change yourself to fit in better, but how to inhabit yourself so completely that fitting in becomes irrelevant to your sense of worth and purpose. This is how you live when you belong nowhere. You learn to belong so completely to yourself that everywhere becomes home.